Well, good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Doc again this morning. It's Tuesday morning, February the 23rd, and we're basically in the middle of the 7-year tribulation period in the book of Revelation as we continue to go through that. And you may hear some noise in the background. I'm still at my daughter's house, and Lisa and Barbara are downstairs somewhere cooking, and you may hear a blender going or something. I have no idea what they're doing, but I'm going to enjoy the fruits of it a little bit later. But at least for us right now, for the next 8 or 9 minutes, we're going to be looking in the middle of Jewish territory during the tribulation period, because when we get to chapter 11 and 12, we are basically on the Jewish homeland, and we're talking about the second woe is being introduced here. And even though we're in the middle of the tribulation period, chapter 11 is going to take us back and show us what's happening during that first part of it that leads up to the middle part of the tribulation period. And it has to do with two Jewish witnesses that are called out by God. And so the way that it's introduced here is the setting is the temple. Now we know that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and we know that there's not been a Jewish temple built, and we know that there's a possibility that the Muslim religion's holiest place is built on the side of the old temple, and then there's other news that maybe it's not. I'm not going to speculate on that, but I do know this. I do know that there will be a New Jerusalem temple built. The Jews will have a New Jerusalem temple. I think it was very significant that President Trump moved the capital, or not the capital, but moved the American embassy to the city of Jerusalem, the ancient capital of Israel, because Jerusalem is where the temple is going to be built. That's where the center of the Jewish life is going to be in the future. And so that's where we are. We're in Jewish territory as we come back into chapter 11, and we're going to backtrack just a little bit and listen to what John says about that in verse 11. Now, we're going to get to the beast and the Antichrist and all that later on, but here he's backtracking a little bit to tell us about the Jewish witnesses. And listen to what he says in chapter 11. He said, I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshipers. But exclude the outer court, do not measure it, because it was been given to the Gentiles. Now there was the court of the Gentiles in the old temple was outside around that. Then there was the court of the Jews, then there was the Holy of Holies, and so forth and so on. And we're not going to get into that today, but just to remember that as he's measuring this, God says not the Gentile court, the surrounding area, but just the main temple area. And he says, do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. And they, that is the Gentiles that are not believers, they will trample on the holy city for 42 months. Now, something about that ought to ring to us. And Daniel's, when he talks about his 70th week and the abomination of desolation and everything, he talks about a period of this same magnitude, 42 months, which is 3.5 years. And he says they will trample on the holy city, Jerusalem, for 42 months. In other words, the beast is going to break his covenant of peace with Israel, and they're going to run roughshod and at war over Jerusalem, over Israel, for another 3.5 years. That's the last part of the tribulation period, the Great Tribulation. And he says, so this is that breaking point midway through it. And he says, and I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Now the 42 months, 1,260 days, both of them add up to the 3.5 years. And so during that first 3.5 year period, these 2 witnesses are going to be going everywhere sharing the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. And they're going to be performing miracles. And in performing these miracles, they're going to bring and draw many, many people to Christ primarily of Israel, because remember we read about the 144,000. And these guys, these two men, are going to be responsible for that. Now, we don't know who they are. They're not named, so we don't know. There are some folks who say possibly Moses and Elijah, but we don't know. We know they're prophetic figures. We know that they're after the model of the Old Testament prophets. And they're going to be preaching, as I said, mainly to the Jews, and the results is going to be 144,000 Jews, 12 from each nation, each tribe that comes to know the Lord. Now listen to what he says in verse 4. They are the two olive trees and the two lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone, now listen to this, if anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouth and devours their enemies. So this is just a hint. If you get left at the rapture, don't badmouth two guys who look like prophets who are preaching the gospel. Because he says if anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. You think it's bad now? They have power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. And they have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want to. 2020 was bad. 2021 may be worse, but neither one can hold a light to what's going to happen during this time. You see, during the 3.5 years of peace, it doesn't mean there's not going to be tribulation. There will be tribulation during the first 3.5 years. But it can't hold a candle to the last 3.5 years. But it's so much worse than what we know now. We don't even understand it. We're fussing and crying because our electricity gets cut off, or because it's too cold or too much snow. Good night. Listen, folks, we haven't seen anything yet. They have power to turn the waters into blood, to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want to. Every kind of plague as often as they want to. Now, when they've finished their testimony, that is, when they've done what God sent them to do, the beast that comes up from the abyss, and we'll talk about that later, will attack them and will overpower them and will kill them. And everybody's going to breathe a great sigh of relief. They're gone. They're dead. They're not going to bother us anymore. Kind of like people talking about Rush Limbaugh. I'm not saying he's going to rise again, but bless his heart, he loved the Lord and he finished his course well. But there are a lot of folks on the left, the liberal side, said, yay, we're glad Rush is dead. That's what they're going to be saying about these guys. They're going to be saying, we're glad, in verse 8, their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, and that's Jerusalem, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. That's Jerusalem. For 3.5 days, some from every people, every tribe, every language, and every nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. They're glad these guys are gone. Verse 10, the inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. People who are hoorahing and glad that other people that they don't agree with have died, they're going to do that in abundance to these two prophets, to these two witnesses who've gone everywhere preaching and performing miracles and stopping the rain and just calling forth pestilence and all kinds of stuff. And so they're happy they're gone. I like this verse 11, though. It's one of God's eternal howevers or buts. Verse 11, but after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck all of those who saw them. Well, I guess so. It would me. Would you? Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. Just like John was told at the first of Revelation, come up here. Just like we are going to hear when the rapture comes, come up here. And it says, and they went up into heaven in a cloud while their enemies looked on. I wonder what CNN's going to say about that when that happens. Verse 13, at that very hour, there was a severe earthquake, and a tenth of the city of Jerusalem collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. Wow. And then he says in verse 14, the second woe has passed. The third woe is coming next. You mean that's only the second one? Yeah, that's just the second one. Can I just tell you, it can always be worse than what we're going through? Always. And it will be. If you don't know the Lord, get to know him before the rapture, and that could be at any moment. Because there's words that say that the plans for the New Jerusalem temple have already been laid. Materials have been gathered. The new temple is going to be built. And you can build a pretty big temple in 3.5 years. So the rapture is next, and there's nothing left to be fulfilled before then. If you don't know Jesus, give your heart to him. Well, God bless you. We'll see you in the morning when we come at this again. And we'll be looking at chapter 12 tomorrow. And we're still going to be on Jewish ground when we come back in the morning. So God bless you. Y'all have a great day today.